She had told herself every year for the past 12 years that she would never go back to the chalet. Yet there she was, standing at the edge of the gravel driveway, watching the way the afternoon light caught the wooden beams, the way the mountains rose behind it exactly as they always had. Some doors, she had learned, remain open no matter how firmly you believe you've closed them. The key was still in her pocket, cold and small against her palm, a weight she had carried farther than she'd ever intended. The chalet belonged to her family, technically. Her grandmother had left it to her and her sister, but neither of them had used it in over a decade. Life had pulled them in different directions. Careers, marriages, children, divorces. The chalet had become a relic of simpler summers, a place they spoke about with fond nostalgia, but never actually visited. Until last month, when her sister had called and said they needed to decide, keep it or sell it. The roof needed repair. The property taxes were climbing. It was time to be practical. She had volunteered to come here to assess the place, to take photographs for the real estate agent. Her sister had been relieved, but that wasn't why she had come, not really. She had come because she needed to see if the memories were as powerful as they felt in the middle of sleepless nights. She had come to prove to herself that it was just a building, just wood and stone and glass. She had come to close the chapter she should have closed 12 years ago. The door opened before she reached it. He stood in the doorway, older but unmistakably him. His hair had gone grey at the temples. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But his hands, resting against the doorframe, were the same hands that had once held hers while they watched the stars from the deck, the same hands that had let her go without a fight. "Emma," he said. His voice was quieter than she remembered, but it still did something to her chest, something she had spent years trying to forget. She stopped walking. "Daniel." For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, sharp and clear. She thought about turning around, getting back in the car, calling her sister and saying she couldn't do this. But her feet stayed planted on the gravel, and her eyes stayed on his face. "I didn't expect anyone," he said finally. "Neither did I." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "You should come in, it's cold." She hadn't planned on going inside, not with him there, but the alternative was standing in the driveway having this conversation, and that felt worse somehow. So she walked forward, past him, into the space that still smelled like cedar and old summers. The interior hadn't changed much. The furniture was the same, though the sofa cushions looked flatter, more worn. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, and someone, Daniel, she assumed, had built a fire. The flames cast moving shadows across the floor. There were books stacked on the coffee table, a mug beside them, reading glasses folded on top of an open paperback. Signs of habitation. Signs that this wasn't just a place he was visiting. "You're staying here," she said. It wasn't a question. "I've been here for a few months." He closed the door behind her, but he didn't come closer. He stayed near the entrance, as if giving her space, as if he understood that proximity was complicated. "I'm renting it, or I was. Your sister didn't mention... She didn't know I was coming today." Emma set her bag down on the bench by the door. "She didn't mention you were here." "I reached out to her last winter, asked if I could lease the place for a while. She said yes." He paused. "I thought about mentioning it to you, but I didn't know if I'd want to hear from you." "Yes." She turned to look at him properly. 12 years was a long time, long enough for lives to be built and dismantled, long enough for the sharp edges of hurt to smooth into something more manageable, or so she had thought. But standing here, looking at him, she felt 16 again, and 25, and every age she'd been when she'd loved him and hadn't known how to say it. "Why here?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved toward the fireplace, crouching down to adjust one of the logs. "I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere away from everything." Everything. "My marriage ended last year." He said it simply, without drama. "I needed time to figure out what came next." She absorbed this information, trying to untangle what she felt about it. Surprise, maybe. Sadness for him. And something else, something she didn't want to name. "I'm sorry. Don't be. It was the right thing. We both knew it." He straightened up, brushing his hands off on his jeans. "What about you? Are you divorced?" 3 years now. He nodded slowly. "I heard. I wasn't sure if it was true." "It's true." Another silence settled between them, but this one felt different, less awkward, more weighted. They were two people who had once known each other completely, standing in a room full of ghosts. She walked toward the window that overlooked the valley. The view was achingly familiar. She had stood here countless times in countless summers, watching the light change, watching weather systems move across the peaks. This was where she had fallen in love with him, slowly and completely, across 4 summers when they were young and stupid and convinced that love was enough. "I came to take pictures," she said, still looking out at the mountains. "My sister and I are thinking about selling." "I know, she told me. Did she tell you I'd be coming?" "No, but I hoped you might." Emma turned to face him. "Why would you hope that?" He met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Because I've been waiting 12 years to see you again." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. She wanted to say something cutting, something that would protect her, but she couldn't find the words, because part of her had been waiting too, even if she'd never admitted it, even if she'd built an entire life designed to prove she'd moved on. "You could have called," she said finally. "I did, once, 7 years ago. You didn't answer." She remembered. She had seen his name on the screen and let it ring through to voicemail. Then she deleted the voicemail without listening to it and blocked his number. It had felt necessary at the time, like survival. "I wasn't ready," she said. "And now? I don't know." He crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes, the same ones she used to trace with her fingertips. "Can I make you coffee? Tea? Something stronger?" "Coffee," she said, because she needed something to do with her hands. Some reason to stay a little longer even though every instinct told her to leave. He moved into the kitchen, the small galley kitchen that opened into the main room, and began making coffee with the ease of someone who knew where everything was. She watched him, noticing the small changes. The way he favored his right leg slightly when he walked, the reading glasses she'd noticed earlier, the silver band he wore on his right hand instead of his left. "How long are you staying?" he asked, measuring grounds into the French press. "I don't know. A few days, maybe. Long enough to document everything, make a decision." "You could stay here. There are 3 bedrooms. I'm only using 1. "Daniel." "I'm not suggesting anything," he said quickly. "Just practical. It's your place. I'm the one who should probably leave if it makes you uncomfortable." "Where would you go?" "There's a motel in town." She thought about him packing up his things, driving down the mountain, giving her the space she probably needed, and she thought about being here alone, surrounded by memories, trying to catalogue the place without him in it. Both options felt wrong. "Stay," she heard herself say. "We're adults. We can manage a few days." He nodded, pouring hot water over the grounds. "Okay." They drank their coffee in chairs that faced the fireplace, not quite looking at each other, not quite avoiding it either. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't unbearable. It was the silence of 2 people trying to figure out what they were allowed to say after so much time had passed. "Do you remember the summer we met?" he asked eventually. "Of course. You were reading on the deck. You had your feet up on the railing. You didn't hear me coming up the path. You scared me half to death. You threw your book at me. You deserved it." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Probably." She remembered that day with painful clarity. She'd been 23, just finished with grad school, spending the summer at the chalet while she figured out what to do with her life. He'd been hiking the trails, a friend of a friend who'd been told about the good paths nearby. They'd started talking, and then they'd kept talking, day after day, until talking became something else entirely. "We were so young," she said. "We were. We thought everything was simple." "I know." She looked at him then, really looked at him. "Why did you let me go?" The question came out before she could stop it, before she could wrap it in safer words. It was the question that had lived in her chest for 12 years, the one she'd asked herself 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. He set his coffee down carefully. You wanted to go. You had the job offer in New York. You were excited about it. I wanted you to ask me to stay. I know. Then why didn't you? He was quiet for a long time. The fire popped and settled. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving through the pines with a sound like water. Because I loved you too much to ask you to give up your dream for me, he said finally. Because I was afraid that if you stayed, you'd resent me eventually. Because I thought love meant letting you go. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I know that now. I would have stayed. If you'd asked, I would have stayed. Would you? His voice was gentle, not challenging. Really? Or would you have wondered what you'd missed? Would you have stayed through the winters, through the hard years, when the romance wore off and it was just life? She wanted to say yes, absolutely, without question. But he was right to doubt. She had been 23 and ambitious and hungry for the world. She had wanted him, but she had wanted other things too. And maybe she would have resented him eventually. Maybe they both would have resented each other for the futures they didn't choose. We'll never know, she said. No, we won't. The truth of it sat between them, heavy and final. They had made their choices. They had lived their separate lives. She had married someone else, someone practical and stable, who had seemed like the right choice at the time. He had done the same. They had tried to build the futures they were supposed to want. And now, 12 years later, they were both divorced and sitting in the same room, drinking coffee and acknowledging the door they'd closed. Why are you really here? Emma asked. And don't say you needed somewhere quiet. The whole world is quiet if you want it to be. He looked at her for a long moment. I came here because this is the only place I've ever been completely happy. Because every other place I've lived has felt like I was trying to be someone I wasn't. Because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be myself. And have you remembered? Yes, but it's been lonely. She understood that. God, she understood that. Her own life had felt like a performance for years, like she was playing the role of someone who had made all the right choices and was satisfied with them. The divorce had been a relief in some ways. It had been permission to stop pretending. I should get my things from the car, she said, standing up, if I'm staying. You don't have to decide now. I've already decided. She went outside, into the cold afternoon air, and stood by her car for a moment before opening the trunk. The mountains were turning purple in the fading light. The chalet glowed warm behind her. She could leave. She could drive back down the mountain, check into a hotel in town, hire someone else to document the property. She could protect herself from whatever this was going to become. But she had spent 12 years protecting herself, and it hadn't made her happy. It had just made her safe. And maybe she thought she was tired of being safe. She grabbed her bag and her camera equipment and went back inside. Daniel had moved to the kitchen and was pulling things out of the refrigerator. Are you hungry? I was going to make dinner. You cook now? I've learned. Turns out, it's necessary when you live alone. She set her things down and joined him at the counter. What are we making? We? If I'm staying here, I'm not going to make you wait on me. What do you need me to do? He handed her a cutting board and a knife and some vegetables. You can start with these. They worked side by side, not talking much, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised her. He was right, he had learned to cook. The meal he assembled was simple but competent. Pasta with vegetables and olive oil, bread warming in the oven, a salad. She set the table while he finished cooking, finding the plates and silverware in the same places they'd always been. They ate at the small table by the window, the darkness outside turning the glass into a mirror. She could see their reflections, two people sharing a meal, looking almost like they belonged together. It was strange and familiar and dangerous all at once. Tell me about your life, he said. The last 12 years, what have you been doing? Working mostly. The job in New York was good for my career. I moved around a lot. Boston, Chicago, back to New York. I got promoted. I got married. I got good at pretending I was happy. When did you know you weren't? About 5 years in, but it took me 3 more to do anything about it. What made you finally leave? She thought about how to answer that. The truth was complicated, messy, full of small moments rather than one big revelation. I woke up one morning and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt like myself. That I'd built this whole life and it looked good from the outside, but inside I felt like I was slowly disappearing. And I thought, if I don't leave now, there won't be enough of me left to save. He reached across the table and took her hand. The touch was brief, just a moment of contact, but it sent electricity through her entire body. I'm sorry you went through that. What about you? What happened with your marriage? Similar story, different details. We met through work. She was smart, accomplished, beautiful. On paper we made sense, but we never really connected. Not the way I wanted to. Not the way I'd connected with... He stopped. With me. Yes. With you. He pulled his hand back, wrapping it around his wine glass instead. I tried. We both did. But you can't force something that isn't there. And eventually we both got tired of trying. Do you regret it? The marriage? No. I learned things. I'm grateful for the time we had, but I regret not being braver when it mattered. I regret letting fear make my decisions. Emma understood what he was saying, what he wasn't quite saying directly. They had both been afraid 12 years ago, afraid of wanting too much, of asking for too much, of the vulnerability that came with admitting how much they needed each other. So they had chosen safety instead. They had chosen paths that looked responsible and adult, and ultimately made them both miserable. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "That summer, after I left, did you ever think about coming after me?" He was quiet for a moment. Every single day for the first year, I must have typed out 100 emails I never sent. I'd pick up the phone and then put it down. I'd buy plane tickets and then cancel them. "Why didn't you send the emails? Why didn't you call?" "Because you seemed happy. Your social media made it look like you were living this amazing life. And I thought, who am I to disrupt that? Who am I to show up and complicate things when you've clearly moved on?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. I wasn't happy, I was performing. Every picture, every post, it was all carefully curated to make it look like I'd made the right choice. But inside, I was falling apart. I wish I'd known. Would it have changed anything? I'd like to think so, but honestly, I don't know. I was in my own performance by then, trying to convince myself I was building a life that mattered. They cleaned up the dinner dishes together, another small domestic act that felt both natural and loaded with meaning. Emma washed while Daniel dried, and they moved around each other in the small kitchen with an ease that spoke of muscle memory, of bodies that had once known each other well. When the dishes were done, Emma said, "I should probably get some work done. Take some photos while the light's still..." She glanced at the dark windows. "Never mind. I'll start tomorrow. There's a good desk in the second bedroom if you want to set up there. The Wi-Fi's decent, considering where we are." "Thanks." She retrieved her bags and he showed her to the room, which was smaller than the master, but had large windows facing the valley. Someone, Daniel she assumed, had made the bed with fresh linens. There were towels folded on the dresser. "Bathrooms across the hall," he said, standing in the doorway. "If you need anything, I'll be fine, thank you." He nodded and turned to go, then stopped. "Emma?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you're here. I know it's complicated, but I'm glad." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. He left, closing the door softly behind him, and she sat down on the bed, surrounded by the weight of everything that had been said and everything that still hung between them, unspoken. She didn't sleep well. The bed was comfortable enough, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She kept replaying the conversation, analyzing every word, every look, trying to understand what was happening. Part of her wanted to leave first thing in the morning, to protect herself from whatever this was becoming. But another part of her, the part that had been waiting 12 years without knowing it, wanted to stay and see where this led. Morning came cold and bright. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Daniel moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly, pulling on jeans and a sweater, and went to find him. He was at the stove making eggs. "Good morning. How did you sleep?" "Honestly, not great. Me neither." He offered her a small wry smile. "Coffee's ready." They ate breakfast with the ease of the previous night, talking about small things, the weather, the repairs the chalet needed, the best hiking trails nearby. It was pleasant, ordinary, and underneath it all, Emma could feel the current of everything they weren't saying. After breakfast, she got her camera and started documenting the property. Daniel offered to help and she accepted, grateful for his knowledge of the place. He showed her where the roof was leaking, where the deck needed reinforcing, where the foundation had small cracks that should be addressed. He'd clearly been paying attention, caring for the place as if it were his own. "You love this place," she said, taking a photo of the stone fireplace. "I always have. Even that first summer when I was just hiking through, I felt it. This place has, I don't know, soul. My grandmother felt the same way. That's why she bought it. She said some places hold on to the good things that happen in them." She was right. They spent the morning working through the main floor, then the upstairs bedrooms, then outside to document the exterior and the property itself. Emma took hundreds of photos, making notes about what needed repair, what could be highlighted in a listing. But with every photo, with every room, she felt the impossibility of actually selling this place. It wasn't just a building, it was a repository of memory, of possibility, of all the things they'd left unfinished. They stopped for lunch around 1, making sandwiches from what was left in Daniel's supplies. They ate on the deck, bundled in jackets against the cold, looking out at the mountains. "What will you do if you sell?" he asked. "I don't know. Split the money with my sister, invest it, be practical. And if you don't sell, I don't know that either." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking, if you do sell, I'd like to make an offer." She looked at him, surprised. "You want to buy it?" "Yes. I know it's probably more than I can afford, but I'd like to try. This place, it means something to me, more than anywhere else I've ever been." Emma understood what he was really saying. This place meant something to him because of her, because of the summer they'd shared, because it was where he'd been happy, and the thought of him living here, of him making a life here without her, created an ache in her chest she couldn't quite name. "I'll think about it," she said. They spent the afternoon working on the property together, small repairs that Daniel had been putting off, things that needed 2 people to manage properly. It felt good to work with her hands, to do something physical and straightforward, and it felt good to work beside him, to fall back into the easy partnership they'd once had. As the sun started to sink toward the peaks, they took a break, sitting on the deck steps with bottles of water. "Do you remember the night we sat out here and talked until dawn?" Daniel asked. "Of course. You told me about your family, about your father. You were the first person I'd ever told. The first person who made me feel like it was okay to talk about it." She remembered that night so clearly. The way he'd opened up, slowly at first and then all at once, about his childhood, about the father who'd left, about the wounds he carried. She had felt honored by his trust, by his willingness to be vulnerable with her, and she had shared her own stories, her own fears. They had seen each other that night, really seen each other in a way that felt rare and precious. "We were good together," she said quietly. "We were." "So why did we let it end?" He turned to look at her. "Because we were young and scared, and we didn't understand that what we had was rare. Because we thought we had time. Because we believed the lie that if it's meant to be, it'll work out on its own." "Do you still believe that?" "No, I think if something matters, you have to fight for it. You have to be brave enough to say what you want, even if it's terrifying." She felt her heart beating too fast. "And what do you want, Daniel?" He held her gaze, and she could see him making a decision, gathering courage. "You. I want you. I've wanted you for 12 years. I've loved you for 12 years. And I know that's not fair. I know it's too much to say after one day, but I can't let you leave again without telling you the truth." The words hit her like a wave, overwhelming and inevitable. She had known on some level that this was coming. She had felt it building all day, had felt the way they were circling around each other, getting closer. But hearing it said aloud, hearing him lay himself bare, was still almost more than she could process. "Daniel, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. I needed to be brave enough this time to tell you how I feel. Even if it doesn't change anything. Even if you leave tomorrow and I never see you again, at least I'll know I tried." She thought about all the years she'd spent wondering what if. All the nights she'd lain awake thinking about him, about the life they might have had together. All the times she'd almost reached out and then convinced herself it was too late, that too much time had passed, that some doors once closed couldn't be reopened. "I loved you too," she said. "I never stopped." His eyes widened slightly. "Emma, I tried. God knows I tried. I tried to move on, to build a life without you in it, to convince myself that what we had was just a summer romance, something sweet but not serious. But I couldn't. Every relationship I've had since I've compared to you. Every time I've been happy, I've wished you were there. And every time I've been sad, I've thought about how much easier it would have been if I'd just been brave enough to tell you the truth 12 years ago." "What truth?" "That I was terrified. That the thought of loving you that much scared me more than anything else in the world. Because I knew if I let myself need you, really need you, I'd never be the same. I'd never be able to protect myself the way I'd always protected myself." He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "And now, I'm still terrified, but I'm more terrified of walking away again, of spending another 12 years wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave. So what do we do?" She looked at their joined hands, at the way they fit together, at the way her whole body seemed to relax into his touch. "I don't know, we can't just pick up where we left off. We're different people now. We've lived entire lives apart. We have complications, jobs, families, histories." "I know. And even if we wanted to try, what would that look like? Where would we live? How would we—" He squeezed her hand. "Emma, stop." She stopped. "We don't have to figure it all out right now. We don't have to have a plan for the next 12 years. We just have to decide what we want in this moment. And what I want, right now, is to not waste another second pretending I don't love you." She looked at him, at this man who had held her heart for so long without knowing it, and felt something shift inside her. Some wall she'd built, some protection she'd maintained, finally crumbling. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay, let's try. Let's be brave." He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that transformed his whole face, and she remembered why she'd fallen in love with him in the first place. He had always been able to make her feel safe enough to be vulnerable, strong enough to be soft. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, but she didn't. Their lips met carefully, tentatively, like they were learning each other all over again. But underneath the newness was the old familiarity, the recognition that their bodies carried even if their minds had tried to forget. The kiss deepened, and Emma felt 12 years of longing pour out of her, 12 years of missing him, of wanting him, of loving him from a distance. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said, "not just for a few days. Stay. I have a life, a job, an apartment lease. So did I. I gave it all up to come here, and I haven't regretted it for a second. It's not that simple." "Why not?" She pulled back to look at him. "Because I'm scared. Because this feels too good to be real. Because I've already lost you once, and I don't think I could survive losing you again." "Then don't lose me. Choose me. Choose this. Choose us." It was what she'd wanted him to say 12 years ago. It was what she'd dreamed of hearing in countless scenarios she'd played out in her head. And now that he was actually saying it, she felt paralyzed by the enormity of it. "I need time," she said. "I need to think." She could see the disappointment flash across his face, but he nodded. "Okay, take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They spent the evening in a strange, gentle tension. They made dinner together again, talked about safer topics, pretended that everything hadn't just shifted between them. But the air felt electric, charged with possibility and fear in equal measure. Emma kept catching herself watching him, memorizing small details, the way his hands moved when he talked, the crease that appeared between his eyebrows when he was thinking, the sound of his laugh. She went to bed early, claiming exhaustion, but really she just needed space to process. She lay in the dark, listening to the sounds of the chalet settling around her, and tried to think clearly. Staying would mean upending her entire life. Leaving would mean walking away from the one person who had ever made her feel completely known. Both options felt impossible. The next morning she woke to find Daniel already gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Went into town for supplies, back by lunch. Make yourself at home. She made coffee and stood by the window, looking out at the mountains, trying to imagine what her life would look like if she stayed. Could she work remotely? Could she find work here? Could she really leave everything she'd built, even if that everything had never quite felt like enough? She spent the morning going through the photos she'd taken, making notes, trying to be practical and analytical. But every image of the chalet, every angle and detail she'd documented, just reinforced how much this place meant. Not just because of the memories, but because of the life it represented. A simpler life, a truer life, a life where she might actually be happy. Daniel returned around noon, carrying bags of groceries and a bouquet of wildflowers. I thought the place could use some color, he said, handing her the flowers. They're beautiful. So are you. She felt her cheeks warm. Daniel, sorry, I know we're taking things slow, but it's true. They made lunch together, falling back into the easy rhythm that was becoming familiar. They talked about the property, about the repairs that were needed, about what the real estate agent had said about market value. It was practical, boring conversation, but underneath it, Emma could feel both of them waiting, wondering what would happen next. After lunch, Daniel said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her outside, down a path she remembered well. It wound through the pines, up a small rise, and ended at an overlook that gave a spectacular view of the valley below. They'd come here often that first summer, especially at sunset. "I come here every evening," he said. "Sometimes I bring a book. Sometimes I just sit. It's still as beautiful as I remember. More beautiful now that you're here." She smiled despite herself. "That's a terrible line." "Doesn't make it less true." They sat on the flat rock that served as a natural bench, shoulders touching, looking out at the view. Emma felt the quiet between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had said what needed to be said, and were now waiting to see what came next. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, "about staying. And I want to. More than I've wanted anything in a long time. But I'm terrified of making another mistake, of choosing what feels good in the moment and regretting it later." "That's fair. When I left 12 years ago, I thought I was making the right choice. I thought I was being smart and practical and adult, and maybe I was, but it cost me something. It cost me you. And I don't know if I can trust my own judgment anymore." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something I've learned? Please. There's no such thing as a perfect choice. Every decision costs something. The job in New York cost you me, but it also gave you experiences and growth and a career. If you'd stayed, you might have gotten me, but you also might have always wondered about the path you didn't take. The question isn't whether a choice is perfect, it's whether it's true, whether it aligns with who you really are and what you really want. And how do you know what you really want? You ask yourself if nothing else mattered, not what people think, not what seems responsible, not what's safe, what would you choose? And then you ask yourself if you can live with not having that. Emma thought about this. If nothing else mattered, she would stay. She would build a life here with Daniel. She would figure out the logistics later. But could she live with not having that? Could she go back to her apartment in the city, her career, her carefully constructed life, knowing she'd walked away from this again? "I can't live with not having this," she said quietly. "I tried for 12 years and it nearly destroyed me." "Then you know what to do." "It's still terrifying." "Of course it is. Anything worth having is terrifying." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat like that as the afternoon light began to shift toward evening, turning the valley golden, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. "What would it look like?" she asked. "If I stayed? However you want it to look. You could live here full time. You could split your time between here and the city. You could try it for a few months and see how it feels. There's no one right way to do this. Would we live together? Eventually, if that's what you want. But we don't have to rush. We could take it slow, give ourselves time to remember each other, to figure out who we are now instead of who we were 12 years ago." "That sounds reasonable." "Does it sound good?" She thought about it. "Yes. It sounds good. He pulled her closer. Emma, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to give up your life for me. I'm asking you to consider if the life you have is really the one you want, and if it's not, to be brave enough to imagine something different. What if I fail? What if I try this and it doesn't work? Then at least you tried. At least you'll know. And that's more than most people can say. She turned to look at him. When did you get so wise? 12 years of regret is a hell of a teacher. She kissed him then, there on the overlook as the sun sank lower, and it felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, she said, Okay, I'll try. I don't know exactly what it'll look like yet, but I'll try. The relief and joy on his face made her believe, for the first time, that maybe this could actually work. They walked back to the chalet hand in hand, talking about practicalities now. Emma would need to talk to her boss about remote work, or possibly find a new job. She'd need to figure out what to do with her apartment, her things. Her sister would need to be part of the conversation about the chalet's future. There were 100 details to sort out, but for the first time in years, Emma felt excited about the future, rather than afraid of it. Over the next 3 days, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings were spent on practical tasks, Emma making calls, sorting through logistics, while Daniel worked on repairs around the property. Afternoons they spent together, hiking or cooking, or simply sitting and talking. Evenings they'd have dinner and then move to the couch where they'd read or watch the fire or increasingly simply hold each other. They were careful with each other, gentle. Neither wanted to rush something that felt so precious. They kissed often but didn't push for more. They shared a bed one night when Emma had a nightmare and came to find him, and he held her until she fell back asleep. But they kept things chaste, respectful of the fact that they were still in many ways learning each other again. Emma talked to her boss, who was surprisingly understanding. She'd been a valuable employee for years, and the company was willing to let her work remotely on a trial basis. Her sister, when she heard the news, was thrilled, both about Emma potentially keeping the chalet in the family and about her rekindling things with Daniel. I always liked him, her sister said, even if you were too stubborn to admit you loved him. On Emma's 4th day at the chalet, she woke up and realized she'd made her decision, not just intellectually, but in some deeper place that felt like truth. She got up and found Daniel making coffee, and she wrapped her arms around him from behind. Good morning, he said, turning to kiss her forehead. I'm staying, not just trying, staying. He set down the coffee pot and turned to face her fully. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure I want to try. I'm sure I can't walk away from this again. I'm sure that whatever happens, I need to know that I was brave enough to choose what I wanted, instead of what seemed safe. He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and when they broke apart, they were both smiling. We'll figure it out, he said. All of it. Together. Together, she agreed. The next weeks were a blur of activity and adjustment. Emma drove back to the city to pack up her apartment, to say goodbye to the life she was leaving behind. It was harder than she expected, but also easier. Because now, instead of running from something, she was running towards something. She was choosing love. She was choosing the life she wanted instead of the life she thought she should have. She moved into the chalet at the end of October, when the mountains were painted with fall colors and the air had turned crisp. She and Daniel took the master bedroom together, after a long conversation about boundaries and expectations and fears. It felt right, waking up next to him every morning, falling asleep in his arms every night. They had hard days, days when they disagreed about small things that suddenly felt enormous, days when the reality of their individual histories and baggage came crashing into their new life together. But they worked through it, committed to honest communication, to not making the same mistakes they'd made before. Winter came, and with it snow that transformed the chalet into something from a fairy tale. Emma found she loved working remotely, loved the quiet of the mountains, loved the way her stress seemed to melt away. She was more productive than she'd been in years, more creative, more engaged. And every afternoon when she finished work, Daniel was there, ready to take a walk or make dinner, or simply sit together by the fire. They talked about the future sometimes, but carefully, not wanting to get ahead of themselves. Marriage was something they both wanted eventually, but they agreed to wait. They'd rushed into marriages before with other people, and they'd learned from those mistakes. This time they wanted to build something solid first, something that could weather whatever came. They made love for the first time on a cold December night, 3 months after Emma had moved in. It was tender and careful and overwhelming, everything they'd both been waiting for without quite knowing it. Afterward, lying tangled together in the firelight, Emma felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. "I love you," she said, the words simple but carrying the weight of 12 years. "I love you too. I've loved you since I was 25 years old, and I'll love you until I die." That's a long time. Not long enough. Christmas came, and they decorated the chalet together, stringing lights and hanging ornaments and building fires that crackled and spat. Emma's sister visited with her family, and Daniel's brother came for New Year's. They were building something real, something that included the people they loved, something that felt like it might actually last. On New Year's Eve, they stood on the deck at midnight, watching fireworks in the distance from town, and made promises to each other. Not formal vows, not yet, but quiet commitments spoken into the cold night air. To be honest. To be brave. To choose each other every day, even when it was hard. "I never thought I'd be this happy," Emma said. "Me neither." "Do you ever regret the years we lost?" Daniel thought about it. "Sometimes. But then I think about how those years shaped us. How we both needed to grow up, to make mistakes, to figure out who we were. And I think maybe we wouldn't have made it if we'd tried 12 years ago. Maybe we needed that time apart to be ready for each other now." That's a generous way to look at it. Well, I'm feeling generous. It's a new year. New possibilities. She kissed him as the last firework faded, and thought about all the new years they'd have together. All the possibilities. All the mornings and afternoons and evenings. All the seasons cycling through. All the years of growing older together, of building a life, of finally having what they'd always wanted. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. There would be hard days and disagreements and moments when they frustrated each other beyond measure. But it would be real. It would be true. And that, Emma was learning, was worth more than any carefully curated performance of happiness. They went inside, back to the warmth, back to the life they were building together. And as Daniel locked the door and turned to smile at her, Emma felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Not the tentative, cautious hope of someone afraid to want too much, but the full, blazing hope of someone who had been brave enough to reach for what they wanted, and had found it waiting for them all along. Some love stories don't end with the first kiss. Some love stories take 12 years, and 2 divorces, and a mountain chalet, and the courage to finally say what should have been said all along. Some love stories are about second chances, about learning that it's never too late, about the way time can be a teacher instead of an enemy. This was one of those stories. And it was finally just beginning. If this story reminded you of something you've held on to, something you never quite said, or someone you never quite forgot, share it with us. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is admit that some chapters aren't finished. Your story matters here.